Hello, welcome back. I'm going to be rude and take a drink of water because I forgot to. I know. I don't know why I don't just edit that out, but we don't take time for that. This is Deuteronomy chapter 22, and this is the last book of the Bible. This is, or the Bible of the Torah, and this is Moses on the mountain, almost a Sermon on the Mount. It's on Moab, but uh, he's expanding on the law and kind of putting some application to it and helping them understand what's coming. Because once they go into the promised land, they're going to not live in tents in the desert. It's going to be homes and fields with animals, and they're going to have to live in a different way, but they're also going to be surrounded by people that are not Hebrew. So they need to know how to live that way. So when you ask yourself, why would I need to know Deuteronomy? Because we are in a place we didn't build, we didn't create, and not everybody around us is a good influence for us. And we need to learn how to live in a world that is not conducive to the way God wants us to live. So that's why we're studying it. So Deuteronomy chapter 22, and I'm going to read from the complete Jewish Bible because I think the way it's worded is a lot more accurate, but it also has a little bit more meaning to it. So let's jump in. You are not to watch your brother's ox or sheep straying and behave as if you hadn't seen it. You must bring them back to your brother. If your brother is not close by or you don't know who the owner is, you are to bring it home to your house and it will remain with you until your brother asks for it. Then you are to give it back to him. You are to do the same with his donkey, his coat, or anything else of your brother that he loses. If you find something he lost, you must not ignore it. If you see your brother's donkey or ox collapse on the road, you may not behave as if you hadn't seen it. You must help him get them up on their feet again. A woman is not to wear men's clothing, and a man is not to put on women's clothing. For whoever does these things is detestable to Adonai your God. If, as you are walking along, you happen to see a bird's nest in a tree or on the ground with chicks or eggs, and the mother bird is sitting on the chicks or the eggs, you are not to take the mother with the chicks. You must let the mother go, but you may take the chicks for yourself, so that the things will go well with you and you will prolong your life. I know that's one of those strange ones, but we're going to break it down. So when you build a new house, you must build a low wall around your roof. Otherwise, someone may fall from it and you will be responsible for his death. You are not to sow two kinds of seeds between the rows of vines. If you do, both the two harvested crops and the yield from the vines must be forfeited. You are not to plow with an ox and a donkey together. You are not to wear clothing woven with two kinds of thread, wool and linen together. I know you're starting to go, wait, didn't we hear this before? Yeah, but we're going to expand on it, remember? So you are not to make for yourself twisted cords on the four corners of the garment you wrap around yourself. If a man marries a woman, has sexual relations with her, and then, having come to dislike her, brings false charges against her and defames her character by saying, I married this woman, but when I had intercourse with her, I did not find evidence that she was a virgin. Then the girl's father and mother are to take the evidence of the girl's virginity to the leaders of the town at the gate. The girl's father will say to the leaders, I let my daughter marry this man, but he hates her. So he has brought false charges that he didn't find evidence of her virginity. Yet here's the evidence of my own daughter's virginity, and they will lay the cloth before the town leaders. This is a fascinating story. You're going to love it. So the leaders of that town are to take the man, punish him, and fine him 2.5 pounds of silver shekels, which they will give to the girl's father because he has publicly defamed a virgin of Israel. She will remain his wife, and he is forbidden from divorcing her as long as he lives. But if the charge is substantiated that evidence for the girl's virginity could not be found, then they are to lead the girl to the door of her father's house, and the men of her town will stone her to death because she has committed in Israel this disgraceful act of being a prostitute while still in her father's house. In this way, you will put an end to such wickedness among you. So that's an example. So if a man is found sleeping with a woman who has a husband, both of them must die. The man who went to bed with the woman and the woman too. In this way, you will expel such wickedness from Israel. If a girl who is a virgin is engaged to a man and another man comes upon her in the town and has sexual relations with her, you are to bring them both out to the gate of the city and stone them to death. The girl because she didn't cry out for help there in the city, and the man because he has humiliated his neighbor's wife. In this way, you will put an end to such wickedness among you. Hang on, I promise we're going to expand on it. But if the man comes upon the engaged girl out in the countryside and the man grabs her and has sexual relations with her, then only the man who had intercourse with her is to die. You will do nothing to the girl because she has done nothing deserving of death. The situation is like the case of a man who attacks his neighbor and kills him. For he found her in the countryside, and the engaged girl cried out, but there was no one to save her. If a man comes upon a girl who is a virgin but who is not engaged, and he grabs her and has sexual relations with her, and they are caught in the act, then the man who had intercourse with her must give to the girl's father 1.25 pounds of silver shekels, and she will become his wife. Because he humiliated her, he may not divorce her for as long as he lives. So, again, we may be thinking, hey, how does this apply to us? What has this got to do with me living in 2025 or whenever you're listening to this? Well, we're going to break it down, and it's just fascinating how God set this up to create something that would be perpetual, eternal, but also apply in so many situations with this basic command. So, let's see. James, Paul, and Yeshua say that it's the spirit that matters. So when we seek justice according to the letter of the law, but without the spirit of love, mercy, and justice, or justice can be lost. And I've been accused of being a legalist, and I think we all should live under the law, even though I'm not, and I don't say that, and I don't believe that. I believe that you can't apply the law without the spirit of mercy and love, because God says it so many times, and he is a merciful God, but he's only so patient. We can't just violate the law willingly and say, well, I'll get away with it forever. I may or may not, for legal reasons, I know a guy who breaks the speed limit quite often, but never gets caught. That person's still wrong. They just hadn't gotten caught yet. So these laws are in the spirit of what Messiah says is the basis for all the Torah commands. Love the Lord your God with all your being and love your neighbor as yourself. It is a reminder that striving for holiness is the goal of the law, and this is the kind of holiness expressed by loving your neighbor as yourself. So, do you mix that mercy and love in there? That's very important. You do not have the option of inaction. Indifference to the needs of others is unacceptable to Jehovah. Indifference is the opposite of love your neighbor. So you have to do something. You have to act when your brother loses something, not just keep walking and go, well, not my problem. So this law is given in its first form in Exodus 23. If you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey straying, you must return it to him. So he grows it. And then this is these verses elaborate on that. And Deuteronomy is that sermon where Moses is taking the law and expounding on it, just like Jesus did in the Sermon on the Mount. So the next law in verse 5 causes a lot of debate. Most translations say this is referring to clothing. It is actually more broad than that. Things pertaining to being a man or a woman. It's referring to a person taking on the characteristics of the opposite sex in appearance, roles or clothing. It's about confusion and deception. Again, it's a hard issue. It's like, what's the intent? It's about pretending to be a sex you are not, is what he's talking about. Causing confusion, tevel, chaos. It was custom for male priests, and there's a very practical reason too. male priests to wear female garments or even cosmetics when the idol that they were worshiping was a goddess. And the idea was disguise himself as a female to identify with the feminine attributes of the female god. That's one of the reasons that God put this law in place, to make them not do what other false religions had done. So men would dress up like women too, so they wouldn't be drafted. It's like, oh no, that's my other daughter, and women wore men's clothing hoping they could be drafted and fight in battles. And the Lord is demonstrating that uh, humanitarianism, that love and mercy extends to all God's creatures, no matter what. He doesn't like confusion, he doesn't like deception, and he doesn't like love and mercy when it comes to his animals, his creation. Just as James says that true religion is demonstrated in caring for the most vulnerable and least valuable of human society. This same principle applies to the animal kingdom. Reverence to a parent-child relationship does not end with humans. And that's why it says, you can take the babies, but don't take the mom and the babies. Have some reverence for that family. And remember, women didn't have a lot of rights back then. So to say, don't dress like women to get out of something, or women to try to fight in battles, he's like, no, don't do any of that deception and make it even harder for the people of society. So recall the fifth commandment in Exodus 20 that says, honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land in which Adonai, your God, is giving you. So here in verse 7, it says, you must let the mother go, but you may take the chicks for yourself so that things will go well with you and you will prolong your life. So by showing respect to the parent and their relationship with the offspring, sparing the life of the mother bird, you will live long and things will go well with you. You will experience God's shalom as a blessing. That's just, it's mind-blowing that he would take that law so close to Exodus to keep showing how it's progressing. So the roof where he wants you to build a little wall, it's because it was really just another living area. And death as the result of the fact that you just disregarded it brings blood guilt on the owner and the community. So it's a problem and you don't do anything about it. Ignorance is not an excuse anymore. So we have 3 laws on illicit mixtures. Remember, illicit means unauthorized, not approved. So a gross misuse of something, a deceptive use of something. So the idea of these 3 forbidden mixtures is that these are combinations that create unions that must never be permitted. These unions fly in the face of God's order of creation, and a severe form of rebellion, because if you've studied the Torah with us, we've studied this a few times. He does not like that. So these 3 laws are extensions from Leviticus 19:19. Observe my regulations. Don't let your livestock mate with those of another kind. Don't sow your field with 2 different kinds of grain, and don't wear a garment of cloth with 2 different kinds of thread. So each of these laws on illicit mixtures are associated with the 7th commandment, adultery, against adultery. These laws represent several aspects of adultery. That's the principle he's teaching, the pattern he's setting up here. None of these mixtures cause harm to anyone or anything, and in fact, some of them can be a benefit. Having 2 kinds of animals pull a plow was common because a man was pretty lucky, pretty wealthy if he owned an ox and a donkey. But 2 oxes or 2 donkeys, sometimes you just go with what you got. And God's sovereign. He decreed it. So just because it doesn't seem like a bad thing to us, he said it, so we should do it. So it's not necessary to know why in order to obey. Our job is asking which pattern or law applies, not why God ordained a law. So it's what they demonstrate that we need to know. That's what we're looking at. So the definition of adultery is an illicit mixture and an unlawful union. Webster says that to adulterate something is to mix the pure with the impure. So in the Lord's eyes, to mix the holy with the unholy, the clean with the unclean. So why a sheep is okay to sacrifice and eat, but a pig isn't clear. We don't know. So why a turtle dove is okay to sacrifice, but a chicken isn't? He created things in a certain order and each for a certain purpose. And to adulterate this order and his purposes is wrong, and it's a sin. He says don't do it. So the laws of prohibiting wearing mixed linen and wool only applies to individuals in the Israeli community. Priests on duty were required to wear clothing made from a mixture of wool and linen. It was non-priests who could not wear clothing like this. So there's no law against weaving together linen and wool. It's only in the wearing of it. So that's one of those things where we say, but what's the God? It must not apply anymore because it doesn't make sense to me. Like, no, laws still apply whether they make sense to me or not. I walk into the refineries. We have a lot of refineries around here, and if I start turning knobs and say, well, they don't matter to me, so I can just hit them, the whole place will panic. And that's basically the same thing we're trying to do, is say, hey, just because it doesn't matter to make sense to me, I'm going to say it doesn't matter. So there was an item worn by all Hebrews that did have this mixture of wool and linen. And that's what we studied earlier, the tzitzit, the tassels. So verse 12 makes it a law for Hebrews to wear these tassels. They must be made out of linen with one wool thread added. So remember, these laws of illicit mixtures are about the seventh commandment, adultery. So he's teaching a pattern and a principle. When we pay so much attention to the detail of wool or pork or whatever it is, we lose the overall spirit of what he's trying to show us, the principle and the pattern. The Hebrew word sha at nez, SHA''ATNEZ, is a Hebrew idiom for prostitution. So a prostitute wore sha'atanez, and it's clothing made of a mixed material. It was a way of kind of identifying her. Today, the term sleeping together indicates something obviously outside our culture they wouldn't catch. Sleeping together means something in every particular context that you use it. We're all grown ups. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So it's the same idea with sha'anatez, atnez, mixed material. The implication of it was understood. You dress like a prostitute. You defy this law, is basically what they were saying. It was easily recognized. So it meant to the Israelites in that area is, you shall not wear the clothes of a prostitute, which are wool and linen together. So a prostitute in ancient times wore beautiful clothes that were a mixture of wool and linen. So mixing that was symbolic of prostitution. And prostitution is a form of adultery. Adultery is an unauthorized union, an illicit mixture. An illicit mixture is an act of adultery before the Lord. So, if you mix something, is your salvation gone? No. It is about chaos and things being used in ways God says no. Now, if you repent and ask for forgiveness, you're forgiven. You're good in Jesus Christ. But back then, they didn't have Jesus. So mixing things, breaking God's commandments, and then not doing a sacrifice meant that, you were separated from God. So Exodus 28 says God's priest must wear garments made of linen and wool mixture. So we can get so focused on doing things, we forget the love and mercy. So on the other hand, we can focus on love and mercy too much, and we declare everything good. Like, because of love, we don't have to pay attention to this anymore. So we are sort of lesser priest, taking our direction from our high priest, Yeshua, Jesus the Messiah. We're to anoint with oil and pray for the needs of others. All things that prior to Yeshua were a function of the priesthood. And 1 Peter 2:9 says this, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. So as a member of God's royal priesthood, I am fully authorized by Torah to wear a mixture of linen and wool. Seems like a long way to get there, but it's like the reason is we should be identified, holy, set apart, and that means what I join myself to, what I mix with, and who and what I come into union with must be considered. So I don't have to do these things because these are for non-priest, and we are priests in the kingdom of heaven. So Paul in 1 Corinthians 6:16 says, don't you know what a man who joins himself to a prostitute becomes physically one with her? For the Tanakh says, the Old Testament, the two will become one flesh. He gives the prohibition against a union between a person made holy and clean with a person not holy and clean. Then he gives the reason. In 6:17 it says, but the person who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him. So we have to live in that. That person's set apart for God. And they have no business coming into union with things or people who are not. Now, this is tough. People don't like you when you leave something or a group. When you say our values don't align anymore, I have to step back. I don't have to defend that. I just have to believe that that's what God's showing me. So in verse 13 are a few examples of relationships, unions. Some are right, some are wrong, and they all affect us. The case of a man who falsely accuses a woman causes a loss of honor for his wife and family. So the parents bring proof. This is such a great story. The idea was that these were to be publicly witnessed. The father says that this man has made false charges, and the evidence is the marriage cloth or marriage garment. So the girl found to have sexual relations prior would be stoned to death. And the father says this is false. So the father's disgraced. So a price paid to the suitor or the father would have to be paid back. So if it was true, then the father would have to pay the money back to the suitor, the husband. So in Israelite culture and biblical law, the first step towards marriage was arranged between the father and the bridegroom, and a price was paid. So once the agreement was reached, then the couple was betrothed. They were engaged. And essentially it made the couple married. The only thing that wasn't there was the consummation, the actual wedding night. So they usually had a quick ceremony and then they had sex. So the consummation occurs on a clean cloth. So the cloth was given to the women to verify that it was clean and there wasn't anything else on it, because it would become a legal piece of evidence. And then the blood smear would prove the girl was a virgin. The girl would proudly present the blood-stained marriage cloth to her parents because that was very honorable. So the parents would display the cloth and show that that honorable marriage had occurred. Our virgin daughter was married, and this is proof of that. You know, today we use like an 8x10 glossy, which is probably a much better idea. But after a time, the cloth was stored just in case something like this happened in Deuteronomy 22. So this explains the need to confirm the unstained cloth, because she could have, stained it ahead of time, knowing this is the procedure. So the husband is judged a liar, and his punishment is severe. His dishonesty is exposed for everybody, so he's lost a lot of honor. He's publicly punished. The fine of 100 shekels was a pretty huge amount. And no matter what happens, he can never divorce her now. So his life is great from now on, I would imagine. So in the second case, the husband's allegations are true, and she is stoned. And the reason is it will purge evil from Israel. It's all about this illicit mixture, this unauthorized union. And that is what God considers adultery, is illicit unions. And, if you're a girl thinking about adultery and you're thinking, hey, last time Sarah got stoned, I'm not going to do it. So the third case is pretty straightforward. If this is true, both are executed. There's no favoritism. The fourth case is pretty clear too. Again, the penalty is death. So There are some exceptions. If this occurs in the city, the idea is the attack within the city would not go unnoticed. She didn't yell out loud enough or somebody would have heard it. Now, remember, there were no cars, trains, planes, televisions, and even windows. There were window openings, but not glass in them. So yelling in a town back then was pretty pretty well noticeable. So uh, an unwilling woman would have cried out. Now, before we get into you're making her the perpetrator. Basically, it's like, no, God understood the society, the men and women of the society, and so he had to set certain rules. These are not complete. He didn't cover everything. So some of it is in the spirit of this. So don't get too caught up in that part of it. He's not downplaying it by any means. But if it happened in the city, the idea is there would have been reasonable resistance that would have been heard. So in verse 25, when it happens in the countryside, and if she claims she was not willing, then her word is taken because she's innocent. It would have been reasonable. Nobody would have heard her if she screamed out. Now, the final case, a teenage girl has a date and they have sex. So by God's rules, a willing union indicates a marriage. You're married now. So the girl's decided she wants the authority transferred from her father to her husband. And the Lord says that a man who has sex with a woman not committed to another man has engaged in marriage and is responsible for her. So the man must pay a bride price of 50 shekels. Also, he will never have the right to divorce her. So you want to slow down teen pregnancy? Teach them Deuteronomy. Also, just finding out you never get to divorce them. So, okay, she's pretty or he's cute. You want to have sex. That's a lifetime commitment no matter what happens. So a father has the duty to protect the woman, all the women living under his roof. And Jesus makes this clear. It all begins in our minds. So Yeshua says a man looking at a woman in lust is adultery. Paul says the body of a believer is the temple of the Holy Spirit of God. And to violate it is to violate God's property and defile his dwelling place. So adultery is the union of any two things the Lord says are not to be mixed together. And sometimes we can see as rationale, and in fact, other than an illustration of a God principle, there may not be any other reason for that analogy. But since the Creator knows the purpose of each of his creations, it's not our job or our right even to challenge or judge his decisions, his rationale, but just discover and follow the plan, because the pattern and the plan protect us. That's why he created it. So the following of these commands without trusting in the Lord and understanding the principle, the spiritual principles they're demonstrating, misses the point too. So to use something in a way that is not consistent with his order of things is perverse and chaotic. It's tevel, Tevel. That's the Hebrew for chaos. So adultery has a deeper spiritual meaning than just sex or sexual relations outside of marriage. Most Bibles might have too the first verse of chapter 23 as the first verse of 22, and that's just a difference of opinion, so don't worry about that too much. So if you heard me read something, you might hear me read it next time too. So that is chapter 22. God bless. Let's read it again and study it again until we get the meaning, the pattern, and the principles that God's trying to teach us. So God bless. Love God, love people, and change the world.